During the last few weeks, we've been discussing how to manage urology problems in remote and rural areas. So the video sort of summarized what we learned over the past few weeks. One of the most important thing to learn is to do a low-cost cystometrogram or bladder pressure studies. This will help us analyze the symptoms which patients have, which are called lower urinary tract symptoms. And once you know the exact cause, when you combine this along with the cystoscopy diagnosis or diagnostic scopies, then we can give a very intelligent and appropriate treatment. And we also saw the video of probably the one important procedure that we need to learn to do is DJ stenting. That will take care of most of the stone problems in rural areas. Even huge stones, it is the first step, and it can help to get them and send the patient either to a urology center or ask a urologist to come and help you break the stones and offer the necessary treatment. Today we're going to have a look at what we can do in a rural area for transitional cell carcinoma. This is one of the common carcinomas. In fact, it's probably the second or third most common carcinoma or cancer in men. And it's equally common in women. In fact, 6% of cancers in men and 2% in women are due to transitional cell carcinoma or bladder carcinoma. One of the important problems with this cancer is that it is multicentric. In other words, it's not just one place it occurs. It can occur anywhere in the bladder or the urothelium. Urothelium covers right from the kidney to the ureter and the bladder. And it can occur anywhere. And transitional cell is the most common, but very rarely other types of cancers called adenocarcinoma can occur. This is one of the cancers which has been have a strong association with carcinogens. Smoking is a very significant factor which contributes to this cancer. So what it means is that you should definitely advise the patients whom you treat to stop smoking. And it's not just actively smoking, even passive smoking could contribute. So if a lady is there with a husband who smokes, it can affect the ladies also. And also it is one of the problems associated with some of the industries, chemical industries like paints, dyes, petroleum products, rubber, leather, textiles. So all these also can contribute to these cancers. And sometimes food preservatives that we use also have chemicals which can contribute to the cancer. And as you said, it's a fairly significant amount because almost 6% of men have this cancer. So the important thing is that you should remember to ask the history of where they are working, whether they are a smoker, and whether they eat quite a bit of these preserved food which have a lot of chemicals nowadays. You know, we remember we went to one village, remote village in Bangladesh border in Tripura. It's a small village, but then almost 1/3 of the village had some type of cancer or other. And we were wondering what had happened. I mean, how can a small remote village can be full of so many types of cancers? Then we found that a forester, they were telling the problem we had because of the arsenic in the water. So some areas which have arsenic in water, they can have quite a significant high number of cancers, especially bladder cancers. And again, earlier when we were students, we used to read quite a bit of schistosomiasis, which are there not so much nowadays. So these also can lead to cancer. And like most of the peripheral cells, the transitional cells undergo rapid replacement. Like skin cells, they get replaced once in 14 days. And the transitional cells get replaced much quicker. So what it means that there are a lot of genetic factors which contribute to these malignancies. Okay, so this again a recap in smoking and tobacco. Sometimes people just chew tobacco, which again is fairly common in Northeast. So they also can significantly contribute to these cancers. And these are all proved by very large studies. So these are fairly well-known factors which contribute to production of these malignancies. So what do they do? So most of the time, they can either present with the irritative voiding symptoms or can cause hematuria, either both gross hematuria, in which the patient can actually see the blood and the urine, or it may be just microscopic hematuria. So any blood and the urine, whatever be the cause, needs evaluation. So because these malignancies, the treatment differs dramatically different if you detect early. So the early treatment has very, very good prognosis and it's easy to treat. While if it becomes a muscle invasive, treatment becomes very complicated. So it's good to diagnose very early. And if they have any symptoms, it can be probably irritative voiding symptoms. So what are the irritative voiding symptoms? They can be what you call dysuria or burning pain while passing urine. And here the burning is in and around the area where the tumor is. So it will be towards the end of voiding. So initially when they start voiding, if there is infection or which causes or urethritis, which causes irritation, the burning will be when they start passing urine. And this is almost towards the end of maturation that they have this irritation. Then because they're irritable, they have a desire to keep passing. So they'll always constantly have an urge to pass urine, which will increase, first manifest as daytime frequency, then it can become nocturia. So these irritative voiding symptoms, but unfortunately are present only in 30% of the patients or 1/3 of the patients. While most of them will have, almost 80 to 90% will have blood in the urine, which can either be gross or microscopic. And very rarely they can cause back pain, and they involve the nerves of the, which is around the bladder, or sometimes they can even cause urinary retention. But asymptomatic patient or presenting with hematuria is probably the most common way of presenting. What are the investigations we do? Of course, urine analysis is the main thing. Any blood in the urine should be evaluated with at least cystoscopy so that you have a look inside to, if not anything else, rule out TCC of the bladder. And then urine cytology, if available, can be a help. And in some center, they even had, because of the particular smell which is associated with the malignancies, they even have sniffing dogs which can go around and diagnose bladder tumors. But these are all experimental. And if you do have ultrasound, these lesions as shown in the diagram here can see these lesions. And of course, people would, higher centers would like CT scan also, because one of the main things we want to find out from a CT scan is whether the tumor has gone beyond the muscle layer, because then the treatment becomes very different when it's confined to the muscle layer or when it invades and goes beyond the muscle layer. These are some of the cystoscopic appearance. So classically what they say is that it appears something like a seaweed, small fronds which are there in the bladder, and sometimes they can appear like a little clumped together, and sometimes they can be lesions something like this, And one other thing probably should not get confused is that lesions which look like this, the one on the left side of the bottom, it may or may not be a malignancy, because sometimes chronic catheterization, we leave a catheter for a long time, there is some inflammation. And these inflammatory granular tissues can also sometimes mimic malignancy. But if they look like this, or like this, or like this, then it's almost confirmatory that they're TCC. While in this case, you'll probably have to wait for biopsy report, especially if there is a history of any stones or anything which causes chronic inflammation. And on the right side, you have a list of pre-neoplastic conditions or pre-malignant conditions, which can later contribute to these malignancies. Okay, this is the important thing we need to sort of understand. These, what you see here is the muscle layer. So there is a detrusor muscle that we have been talking about. So any cancers which are confined to the inner layers, which is it can either be the transitional epithelial layer, which you can see here, or the connective tissue layer. These can be completely removed. But then you need to understand that these are lesions which are multicentric. In other words, they occur anywhere in the bladder and all over the bladder, and multiple lesions will be there. And very often these lesions can be microscopic. In other words, it may not be, even though the cystoscope magnifies the bladder almost 20 times, still you may not be able to see it with the naked eye. But then the good news is that as long as it doesn't go beyond the muscle layer, it is treatable by transurethral means, or we keep removing it. In fact, I still remember, we still treat one of the early patients who was a nun from a nearby city. She presented in almost 2010 or 11, almost 11 years ago, with a tumor which almost filled the whole bladder. So we need to, in fact, resect it in 2 sittings. The first sitting, we removed most of it, and then the remaining we removed. And then when we did biopsies, muscle deep biopsies or tissues with a little bit of muscle, we found that it is not involved, which is good news, because it has not spread beyond the muscle. Because once it goes beyond the muscle, then you need to remove the bladder, then you need to make a new bladder with the intestines, and they need to have a bag to constantly drain urine from the bag and so on. It's a complicated process. But then these superficial ones can be repeatedly treated. So we used to initially offer every month we used to do a cystoscopy. And if there is any new lesion, then we keep resecting it. So first couple of times, or maybe even almost a year, every month she had some small lesion popping up here and there. But then the subsequent ones are much easier to treat. Once you have a biopsy, you know what the condition is. So next time we use the Bugbee electrode to just cauterize and treat it. And fortunately, 85% of the tumors, most of the bladder tumor that we see are superficial. So they are amenable to treatment. But the important thing is that you need to make sure that the patient keeps coming back to you regular intervals. So we do monthly scopies till they are 3 times, there are no tumors. Then again, you start doing them once in 3 months. So you may find that next 3 months, they might have tumor. So you need to have 3 tumor-free cystoscopies once in 3 months. Then you make it once in 6 months. Then finally, once a year. So once you do that, then most of these because of unstable epithelium, so they keep when each place starts becoming a tumor and progressively becomes bigger. So as we keep treating it repeatedly, then it becomes easier to treat. So this particular nun who is more than 80 years old is still doing well because she's been coming for regular follow-up. So again, this is a different way of showing the same thing. But what is important to remember that if it is confined within the transitional epithelium, it's a low risk of spreading. So hardly any, if it is just in the urothelium or transitional cell epithelium, the recurrence is about 30 to 40%, where there's hardly any progression or mortality associated with it. And if it goes beyond the epithelium into the connective tissue layer, it's intermediate risk, which is the grade 2. If you go back the previous slide, then you can see what is grade 1 and grade 2. So grade 1 is T1 here, grade 2 is TA and T1. So these are again within the epithelium. Okay, so then the high risk are the ones which are multiple and which keep carcinoma situ when almost the entire bladder is filled with the tumors. But fortunately, as I said, 85% are amenable to treatment in rural areas and transurethral. So traditional treatment is what is called transurethral resection of tumor. So there we use the resectoscope, which is the same equipment which is used for removing the prostate. So the difficulty is that you need to be a specialist to learn how to use it. Because as the bladder, as I said, is like a dome stay structure. And these scopes are rigid instruments which go in. And the movement is in and out of the scope. So you can you'll touch the thing and the movement is only this way. If you touch here, the movement is this way. So resection is a little difficult. So what we need to do is you need to keep moving the entire scope leathers to resect. So that is a special skill which takes a little difficult to learn because you need to have the feel and also you need to be aware of the depth and so on while resecting. So resecting a tumor with the resectoscope is a fairly difficult thing. And it's a skill which you need to be a urologist and you need to have enough time to learn it. See here, this is the area from which all the blood vessels could go into the tumor. So sometimes if the loop goes through it, then it can start bleeding quite a bit. And all the movements again are like this, in this direction. So it is difficult to resect and technique to learn. So what we would recommend is that earlier we were talking about transurethral vaporization of prostate. So if the tumor is like this, you can comfortably take 1 or 2 chips for biopsy. And then rest we recommend vaporizing. So vaporizing is electrode like this. If you just touch, there is good enough. So it is when you use a vaporizing method, if the bladder is dome shaped also, it is easier to touch at various places and vaporize. So if we have the facilities for a resectoscope and vaporizing electrode, then what we recommend is that you take a little bit for biopsy initially at a convenient place and then start vaporizing the tumor at various places. So when you're vaporizing, one other thing you need to be remembered is that there is an obturator nerve which is outside the bladder. So if the electric current goes there, it can contract vigorously. So the legs will sort of contract and vigorously and come inside. And if you're holding the scope stiff, then it can perforate and cause injuries. So one other thing you need to technically learn is, especially when you're doing vaporizing, is that to hold the scope gently, and if there is any movement, leave it so that it doesn't cause any injury because you're holding it tight. And once you finish resection, then you can take a little bit of muscle tissue to make sure that, especially or in the beginning, if you see clearly, to make sure that there's no muscle involvement of the tumor. But of course, these are things which are not probably possible in rural areas. So the first treatment, especially if the patient presents with a big tumor, then it's a difficult thing. Maybe now can just go back to the video. I'll show the scope. So this is the standard cystoscope that is available. So this has what is called a cystoscopic sheath. So these are for letting in the irrigating fluid, and this is for letting out the irrigating fluid. And if you look through it, probably I don't know whether you probably can't see it, but then it has two holes, one for the telescope to go and one for the instruments to go. And this is called the bridge. So most of these things, you start rotating anti-clockwise. So once it doesn't move anywhere, then fixing is always, generally the principle is fixing in the clockwise direction. So you put it here, fix, and then rotate. And this is for passing guide wire, the bug bay electrode, and the various things. And this is a rubber bung which prevents the leak of the irrigating fluid. So these are just, as you see, these are just made of metal, the medical quality metal, which are not very expensive, and probably a little bit of plastic here and there. But the most expensive part of the cystoscope is the telescope. So these are made by German, good quality ones are made by German companies like Karl Stoves or Richard Wolf and so on. And they're quite expensive, almost in Indian rupees is about 200,000 rupees. And inside there is what we call rod lens, triangular lens, which is arranged so that it transmits the image from here to the eyepiece. And also the light, you need to supply light from outside, light cord, which goes through it. Again, it goes to the bladder. And this is how you connect it. Here again, the connection, you need to first rotate it anti-clockwise and then clockwise. So then, all we need to do is, we need to have the scope. Right now, we don't have the laptop cystoscope. It is in the rural area. Probably next week, Mr. Keso will arrange to show the scope, how we are designed. So what we have done is, instead of the telescope, which is expensive, we have replaced it with the camera. So it gives pictures which are good enough. But there is a little difficulty in that because there are two things. One is that the cameras are auto-focusing. So it takes a little while for the camera to focus. So you need to hold whatever you are looking at, you need to stay there for a few seconds for it to focus. And the other thing is, the beginning I said, when you're using the scope, you connect the camera like this at 12 o'clock. And then if you want to see at 3 o'clock, then you move the scope, but the camera stays at 12 o'clock. So then you can rotate. If you want to go to 9 o'clock, you move like this. But that is not possible with the new scope that we have, where we replace the telescope with the camera. But then it doesn't really matter because this telescope is a 30-degree one, so it looks downward. But the other telescope that we have, in a new one that we are making, where we are replacing the telescope with the camera, it's 0 degrees, so it looks straight ahead. So you can turn whichever way and have a look at it. Then all we need is this is a simple electrode called Bugbee electrode. I don't know if you can see the thing. You can probably see the blue color insulation. It has a metal tip. So this you can pass it through the scope. And once it comes out here, then all you need to do is just touch the tumor with the Bugbee electrode. And it is very effective to burn the tumors. And especially the recurrence, when it occurs, they are all very tiny recurrence. So from the patient is coming for regular cystoscopies, the recurrence will be a small one, which you can just touch with this, and that is good enough. And in fact, last week I told you I was watching a video of laser prostatectomy. And it takes, if you do a regular prostatectomy with the Bugbee electrode, it's exactly looks, the pictures will look exactly like that of laser prostatectomy. Because you can apply vaporizing high voltage current and slowly vaporize the prostate. And laser prostatectomy takes as much time as the prostatectomy, which you can use with the Bugbee electrode. Unfortunately, the bladder tumors, especially the ones which are recurrent, are not big. So it doesn't take too much time to use the Bugbee electrode to offer the treatment in rural areas. Can you go back to the slides, please? Okay, so the word about immunotherapy. See, when I said it is a multicentric origin, so the tumors can be found all over the bladder. But of course, it's painfully, it takes a long time to sort of go and touch and vaporize each of those places where the tumor is present. So earlier people tried various things like immunotherapy, the BCG. So those days we used to have 2 ml vials. So we used to break 60 vials and put a NG tube or infant feeding tube and inject this BCG and leave it about 40 minutes or 15 minutes, asking the patient to lie this way, that way, and move around. Similarly, they tried intravesical installation of doxorubicin, mitomycin C, or valrubicin, and people have also tried chemotherapy. But then all these are more expensive, have side effects, and are probably not as effective as doing a scopy and vaporizing or treating each of those recurrences. It is a painstaking process, repeated process. But then it's worth it because the prognosis, especially if they're not muscle invasive, is very, very good. Of course, if it is muscle invasive, then what do you do? Unfortunately, then once it has gone beyond the muscle, it quickly goes beyond the bladder. So then, even at best, you need to do a radical cystectomy and ileal conduit to divert the bladder. It has a significant perioperative mortality, even in good center. So if you're occasionally doing, the mortality and morbidity is bound to be a little high. But then many of the patients do not like it either, because when they don't like the bladder being removed and having a bag to collect the urine all the time. Especially when in the beginning I told you about one of the nuns whom we are treating for the last 10, 11 years. She also initially went to other places and she was offered a radical cystectomy. And because she did not like that treatment, she came to us. And had she had radical cystectomy, I don't know whether she would have survived till now, because there was another patient who had a smaller tumor than hers, much earlier this thing, and they did radical cystectomy, and that patient is no more. So this is a treatment, especially for 85% of those tumors which are confined to inside the bladder within the muscular layer, which is possible very easily in a rural setting using a low-cost method. What do you do for follow-up? So one of the most important thing is you need to give them the proper advice. First, whatever the causative factors, if they are smokers, they should immediately stop smoking. If they're workers in those dye industries or chemical industries or leather industries or whatever is causing them this problem, if possible, they should change the vocation or move to some other job. But then more than all these things, the important thing is they need to come for regular follow-up. Where they have the money, they don't have the money, means or no means or whatever it is. If they come for regular follow-up, treatment is very simple. So all they need is a scopy. And in many instances, when there is a very tiny lesion, we have been able to do the treatment under local anesthesia. So they may not even need big anesthesia. They may not need admission. If they have a small lesion, you can just touch it and vaporize it immediately. So if they're able to come for follow-up, then it is almost 100% cure rate, I can say. Because there'll be definitely a lot of recurrence. Even when the tiniest of the lesions has about 1/3 or 30% chance of recurring. And if they have multiple lesions, larger lesions, the chance of recurrence are much higher. But as they recur, if we keep treating them, then the chances of them doing well is very good. So the check cystoscopies or repeated scopies are necessary every month till there are 3 consecutive negative scopies. Then you change it to once in 3 months. Then finally once in 6 months, and finally once a year. And but in between, if anytime they have any symptoms, either irritative voiding symptoms or microscopic hematuria or gross hematuria, they should immediately come for a check cystoscopy and further treatment. And if they are available close by, you can do a urine microscopy routinely every month. Even if they have 3 consecutive negative scopies, you can keep following with the microscopic in the urine microscopy to find out if they have any microscopic hematuria. So this is again one more disease, which is a urology problem, which is easily amenable for treatment in rural areas. And probably next week we'll show a little bit more details about the laptop cystoscope, which you don't need all the, here we need a light cord, then the light source, then you need a camera here and the camera setup and the monitor and all those things. None of those are necessary with the laptop cystoscope because we replace the telescope with the camera and it can be directly connected to the laptop and you can see the pictures. Of course, you need to wait because these are autofocus, and also we need to be very gentle and the movements should be very gentle so that the focus and appearance is maintained. See, one other thing, because this is a short lecture, we thought we'll discuss a little bit more about this. So now, unfortunately, the last 4 months we've been under lockdown. We can't travel anywhere, we can't visit any place, we can't go to the place and teach. So one of the things we realized is that the rural surgeons, if we take them to any big cities, urban centers or big medical colleges to teach, when they get back to the place, they find it very difficult to adapt to the rural setting. And again, when they go to an urban center, they are tempted to with the urban life and they might not choose to come back and work in the rural area. And very often, they are not even able to go for such training because they are needed in the rural area and the hospitals can't survive without them. So we felt that going to the rural surgeons and training them is the best method to train the rural surgeons. And now we have got a new problem because of the pandemic. We can't go to the rural areas. So one of the things we are experimenting is that whether is it possible to train or do the training through the Zoom software. So, I mean, as you have been attending these lectures, it's possible to do lecturing in using Zoom. But this is being broadcast by LabGuru and many people all over the world are listening. So, but then this is only a listening mode. So we don't know. I don't know whether you understood what I'm saying or whether you can clarify these doubts. Of course, you can ask a question through chat box or you can talk, but not many people are comfortable doing that, especially when it is being broadcast. So we were thinking of having a smaller groups, 3 or 4 people or 5 people, so that we can have more interaction. So we can talk to each other and ask questions and find out if they learned what we are doing. And then we also, last week we showed that probably, Keshav, can you show that DJ stenting video that we did using Zoom? So what we can do is we can guide people to do the minor procedures. Like if somebody wants to learn how to do a cystometrogram in rural areas, we can watch from here using Zoom whether they're doing it properly. And once they tell us a finding, we can interpret it for them and give the suggestions. Okay, this is one stenting that we saw to make sure that it is possible to use it to supervise.
Pelvic junction region.
Yeah.
You have given final anesthesia. We are going to position the patient now.
So you separate the labia, and again you need to be careful about the various curves and gently insert the scope. Okay. He's in the urethra now, and okay, that's the bladder neck. Then you go. See here. So there you see the interior. Then you go to either side. I think he's going to the left side first because that's where the stone is.
So we are separated by almost 2,000 kilometers distance now. But then we can still see the image and give advice.
Peristalsis comes, yeah. Little bit to the right. If there is difficulty, another option to consider is to use of a hydrophilic guide wire. But if the bladder is full, you can open the other side and let out some water. See somewhere there, that white thing you see there, somewhere near it would be the orifice. Good. So once you find the orifice, you need to align the scope so that if the orifice is there, the scope has to be in line with that. And then slowly, centimeter by centimeter, you need to put the guide wire. And stop pushing the moment there is some resistance. Then it's very important to slowly take out the pusher. So you need to push 1 centimeter and pull it out, pull like that. So while Dr. Biju is pushing the guide wire, the nurse is pulling it out. So the next step is to put the DJ stent. Again, you need to make sure that the guide wire is taut. DJ stent has a double coiling J-shaped structure which keeps a memory so that it doesn't slip out once you place it in. But then we use the guide wire to straighten it and then pass it. And then once you pull the guide wire out, the coiling will take place again. So now the stent is almost reaching near the orifice. So here there is a slight curve. So you might have to use a little bit of force and push it in. And at that time, it's better to have the scope as close to the ureteric orifice as possible. So once it goes there, then the next thing you need to do is use the pusher to push the stent. Hold the guide wire close to the body so that you don't move. If you keep it here, the chances of moving is higher. But if you keep it close.
Okay, so the idea is that it is possible to supervise somebody who is working in a remote area from a distance using Zoom software. And we are also working with some people who are working on two-way video streaming, so that we'll be able to point out where exactly the orifice, if they can't locate the orifice, and till where they need to resect, and so many things. So it is possible to guide, especially these small procedures like cystometrogram, double J stenting, and creating a small passage if they have a BPH, because that should suffice to make them pass urine till they get to a proper urology center to remove the prostate. Or if it is a small prostate, even with the Bugbee, can cauterize slowly and repeatedly and widen the passage. And the small tumors with the Bugbee electrode, we can vaporize and have a proper follow-up. So these things, can you go back to the slides, please? So we are wondering whether we can have a formal training program and also certification and credentialing, because a lot of things are possible just like that. But then people will not accept unless it's sort of scientifically evaluated and quantified and so on. So we are planning to use the OSATs and gold scores and other things to have a third party or people from elsewhere to see how the candidates are doing and sort of have the entire training program, which is through the Zoom platform. And as I said, see, normally if you need to have a cystoscope and do in a regular setup, you need to invest almost 600,000 rupees if it is in rupees. I think roughly about $10,000 or so. But then this laptop cystoscope is the only investment you'll need if you're using the laptop cystoscope for these minor procedure, which will cost less than $1,000. So any other, so we are used for many things. Maybe we'll one of the classes will tell you the various uses of Bugbee. But using for bladder tumors, and I think once previous class I mentioned that even small prostates, and sometimes the urethra in Northeast people are so small that you don't allow the normal resectoscope. In such a time, we have been able to use the Bugbee to slowly do the prostate. And believe me or not, it takes almost the same time as you would if you're using a laser. And people won't mind using a laser because it is expensive and probably gives a lot of income to the urologists who are doing so. They don't care about the time. But then even in the rural areas and village, the time is not a very significant factor, because we can ask the patients to keep coming again and again, or even if it takes a long time for one patient, doesn't really matter. So all these useful things which will make urology practice possible even in very remote areas.
Yeah, I want to thank you very much for the great innovation, because we in Africa, we are faced with these challenges more than any other continent on the earth. So I think this lecture is very helpful for our practice, especially in the rural settings. And even in what we call the capital cities, these standard endoscopic material are still lacking. And so for sure, your lecture is even applicable in most African cities, which are not termed or rural, in a fashionable sense. So I was thinking that for large tumors in the rural settings, what would be your approach? Will you advise that is referred to the cities where they can have a complete resection, or should we attempt to have a biopsy, or what would be your approach for a larger tumor that you find on cystoscopy in the rural setting?
See, we have treated quite a many, but fortunately when we travel or when I travel, we carry the cystoscope. And we use a combination of resection and vaporization. So we resect, only need for resection is for biopsy, for documentation. So we resect at a convenient place and take few chips for biopsy. And then we vaporize most of the tumors. So when we use a resectoscope and vaporizing, it's fairly quick. It doesn't take too much time. And as I mentioned, if it is not possible in one sitting, we can use multiple sittings. And some places we have not had there have times when we use just the bug bee itself to vaporize the entire tumors. So there what we do is we start with the base. So if you're able to locate the base of the thing, we slowly vaporize and remove the thing, which they won't ever get, because then the problem is removing it. Especially in women, what we can do is we can just pass some open surgical instrument like an artery clamp and the scope about and the vision pull it out. But in men also, we can sort of make it into reasonably small chunks and be able to pull it out. And if necessary, we have sometimes used 1 or 2 sittings to do that. Thanks once again for participating, and you're welcome to the next week's lecture. Thank you.